Perfect. So, where did you want to start?
Wherever you want to start. Happy to, I mean, if it makes sense to do a short overview, if it makes sense to kind of, yeah, I don't know how you typically kind of run the interviews, so I don't want to be presumptive.
Okay, so how about I start? And I know I wanted to cover off a couple things, so then. Perfect. Okay, I'm ready. If you are.
Yep,
I
let's
think
do
I
it.
should probably turn on the light here. Hang on. Okay. All right, ready?
Yeah.
Hey everybody, Dave Whitmarsh Consulting Group. Have a special guest today. We have Amy Spurling, who's I guess I should probably know this. What do you go by? President, co-founder, CEO?
Founder and CEO.
Founder and CEO of Compt. And so we had a conversation, I guess about a week and a half ago. And I think that you guys will really like what Amy's put together. And I'm curious to find out how you got in the HR space, because most people sort of in our space, it's a a running joke that we tend to get recycled and come back in, but you somehow we get a start and we never leave. We feel like a 20-time baseball manager that keeps getting regurgitated and placed somewhere else, but you didn't come from HR directly.
Indirectly, though, I've managed HR through my entire career. So I've been a CFO and a COO a bunch of times. And so HR and finance both reported into me. And my background, I'm not an accountant. And so I gravitated a lot more towards the HR side of my role in every one of my companies. And so it was a place where, I mean, I do have that budgeting side of my brain, but if you're even with that, the vast majority of expenses in most companies relate to the people on the team. And so if you're not paying attention to how you think about HR and people ops and structure, you're just missing the boat as a CFO, in my opinion. And so I gravitated very heavily that way versus, the accounting side of things. And so I've been doing that for about, a little over 20 years now.
Yeah, and so you've had some plum roles in a number of organizations. So I'm going to take this opportunity to pick your brain here. So did you find that most organizations at the C level, had a tough time understanding exactly what HR was doing, or?
Yeah, yes. And it was far worse 20 years ago than it is now. I've seen this shift over time. I mean, realistically now HR would not report into me as a CFO, and that's fantastic. Like, I think a lot of CFOs are far too budgeting and strictly numbers oriented and not looking at the human side of HR. And I think that's a big misstep. So I'm glad to see HR having an actual seat at the table. That, like, a chief people operations person or a chief HR officer didn't exist when I started. And so it all came up through either a finance or a COO role. In most companies, it was the old school version of HR, which was strictly like compliance, felt like the internal police force. Where were you at 2:00 on Tuesday? Half the leaders in the organization would try and run right around HR instead of actually engaging them. And I've seen that shift over time as well, which I think is fantastic. And there's just a much better partnership between and an understanding of what HR actually does, which I think is really exciting because there's so much opportunity to really think strategically about how you're building out your teams, how you're making sure that you're compensating people fairly. Like, there's just much more of a push, and HR is front and center on all of it.
Yeah, well, I guess that statistically, a lot of the metrics around retention and engagement
Yep.
and some of the statistics, collectively, I don't think anybody's nailed it perfectly, but I think collectively we know there's value in some of these programs, right?
Yep,
And
exactly.
so it definitely does, gather some attention. So where were you when you thought, okay, Compt is something that's out there that in its origin or thought process, where were you when you thought this is what people need?
It was probably, so I've been part of 6 companies, building 6 companies prior to this, not a founder, always that kind of finance and operations and HR type role. So I was probably at my 4th company where I was like, okay, I'm seeing a repeated pattern here. Every employee wants something different. They're coming in the door saying, I don't want this thing that you're offering. I want something else. Perks started getting really huge. My teams were global. And so I saw that in probably company 4-ish. So that was probably in the 2012 to 2016 timeframe, if my memory is correct. And then I saw it happen again in my next 2 companies, and I was like, all right, this is a problem. Like the way we're compensating people has changed, but the tools haven't changed. And I was watching the HR team as there were more and more perks available, just turn into vendor management, which is a terrible place for HR to be. There's so much more value they add to an organization rather than saying, okay, did yoga get scheduled at 3:00 on Wednesday and who attended? Like that's a terrible use of HR's time. And so I started looking around for a platform, but everything that was being pitched to me was being built by people who didn't come from HR or finance. And so there was no compliance in any of this software. There was no tax management. I was like, okay, this sort of seems like it's heading the right direction a little bit on the employee side, but you're making an even bigger mess internally. And if I brought this into our company, so we need to solve for both of these. And I kind of waited and kept testing the waters, talking to other HR folks for a couple of years, and was like, all right, am I missing something? Like, this is what I'm seeing. They're like, oh my God, that's the thing that's in my brain that needs to be built. And finally I was like, all right, well, nobody else is building it. I'm going to go build it because I don't know how to scale another team and actually build, a workforce within a company that you can attract really good people, retain them, do this globally, have this work at scale to where you're not ripping and replacing software. I was like, I need this if I'm going to do that again. So let's just go do it.
And so probably now, actually, probably before I asked that question, it might have been good. But so why don't we talk a bit about what Comp does then?
Sure.
Just to put it into perspective, what you just said.
Sure. So Compt is employee perk management software. So we help companies design, create, manage employee perk stipends, which allows companies to basically build a really customized sandbox where you're focusing what employees are using their perks for in key areas that align with your culture. So things like wellness or family, you can have like cell phone, internet. We've got like 18 different categories. It's all tax managed, all that stuff. On the other side, employees get to see how much money they have, the time period they to spend it, and the categories you've selected for them. And then they can make it 100% personalized. So health and wellness for one person could mean yoga at a local studio. For somebody else, maybe it's a healthy meal delivery. For somebody else, maybe it's a mental health app. It really allows employees the freedom to do what they want because we're not a marketplace and there are no vendors on our platform by design. So it's allowing for that personalization piece, which drives up engagement by a huge factor.
Right. And so and really that's one of the, like, how do you paint everybody in your organization with one brush, right?
Right.
So everybody
Right.
has their own perks and everybody
Right.
or their own hobbies or ways that they want to
Right.
do things. So it makes a lot of sense to have that flexibility. And the
Right.
truth is, the only reason why the flexibility doesn't really exist is because it becomes a paperwork nightmare.
Right, exactly. Well, and there's a couple of things. One, there's the continual pitch of, hey, here's the perk to help, you attract and retain millennials. And you're like, okay, but some millennials are like 27 and some are 42. So there isn't anything that's going to make both of those groups happy. That's not a thing. The other piece is we ran a study over 4,500 of our users. We studied them for 3 months and said 4,500 people, how many different unique vendors could they use in a 3-month time period? Because that's what a marketplace would need to look like for personalization. And what we found is that 4,500 people use 6,500 different vendors. You cannot build a marketplace that looks like that and have any kind of engagement. Because even if you had that, no one is going to crawl through 6,500 vendors to find the one that they want. So a marketplace just doesn't solve the issues that are at hand or the needs of today's workforce.
Right. So you mentioned some things about compliance and tax. So go into just touch on that. Why is that so important?
Sure. So a lot of employee perks are taxable income to employees and to employers. And if you don't tax them correctly, you can get in a lot of trouble with the IRS. There's certainly stories in the news about prominent figures who didn't tax perks correctly and got themselves in trouble. And a lot of companies have done the same thing and found that they owed penalties to the IRS. A lot of big tech companies actually, because they're very public about all these perks. And a lot of it, if you were spending your own money as an employee, you would have used it as post-tax income. The company would have already paid you for it. And so you need to be able to track and tax the stuff. Not everything has to be taxed though. So there are programs and platforms, think HSAs and FSAs that you don't have to be taxed on, but those things can be used for such a small fraction of what's actually available that they usually get pretty low utilization. We allow companies to include both taxable and non-taxable items in their stipends. So things like cell phone or internet, professional development, student loan repayment, those don't have to be taxed. Things like food or wellness or family benefits, those do need to be taxed. So it allows for that management without somebody in the finance team saying, oh, great, you used this thing. Let me put a check next to that. Now I got to put it on your payroll and make sure the taxes come off. Like that's a huge mess.
And so you gave me an example. Of course, I can't remember it. And I hate to put you on the spot, but give me an example of like an interpretation of what somebody might use and how they might categorize and how they might need it, and how it could come in handy, right? So
sure. So you could pick a category, dealer's choice. You want to talk about like wellness? Do you want to talk about charitable giving? You want to talk about family? Like any of these things can be customized or personalized to an employee. I personally like talking about the family category because this is one where we saw a huge push in the last 18 months of companies saying, oh my gosh, my employees are home with children, having to homeschool, trying to figure out how to be productive at the same time. And so they put in place a lot of family type benefits for people with children. And then there was a backlash from a lot of people don't have children, but they still have families. And they're like, why is that person getting more compensation essentially when I'm doing the same work here and I also have a family, but I'm taking care of my parents, or maybe I'm taking care of somebody else in my family? Why don't I have benefits? And so having something like a family category gets HR out of that really impossible role of saying, oh, we have benefits for people who have fertility issues or have children who are under the age of 5 or who want to use this specific babysitter. They can come out of it and say, look, we support families. Who and what is in your family is your business. Here's the funds to do that. You use it in a way that matters to you. So we see a lot of things. I was just actually looking at the category last night. I've seen everything from a lot of meal delivery, housekeeping, obviously nannies and childcare, seeing things like, we saw somebody who had some plumbing issues and they needed to have their dishwasher replaced because that's what their family needed. Like you can interpret this pretty broadly. And each company kind of defines where that flexibility comes in or is not allowed. But most companies are like, look, if it's what your family needs, do that. That's what matters to you right now. And that's ultimately they're looking at outcomes rather than trying to get into this long list of things you can and can't use your stipends for. The goal is the outcome, the engagement, making sure the team feels supported, not did you use this for this specific item? Because you're not going to, that's an impossible situation for employees and employers.
Right. And so how have you seen things sort of adapt with people working from home, due to COVID, what sort
Yeah.
of changed, or how have companies sort of went, here's an easy way to deal with this, or an
So
easier way.
there's a couple of things we've seen be really big trends. One, remote onboarding stipends. So if your team members are living in their house, you can't just ship them a desk and a monitor and a chair. It may not fit in their house. It may not be their design aesthetic. So a lot of companies are like, look, I don't want to have any part of that. I'll ship you your laptop, but here's an amount of money for you to use. If you don't need a chair, great, get a different desk. Like, here's an amount of money to use for your first 30 days or 90 days, get yourself together. And they don't want to be part of it. We've seen a ton of those. Most of the companies we work with have some sort of a remote onboarding stipend. We also saw at the beginning of COVID, the companies that already had stipends, it was a really easy shift to remote because the perks the employees used, they used them in a different way, but the company didn't have to make any changes. That made it completely seamless, rather than being like, okay, we used to have pizza in the office every day. Now, how are we going to replicate this? The companies with stipends didn't have to do that, which made it much easier. But we also saw the uses that employees picked up changed pretty dramatically, which was really interesting. And honestly, it was pretty impactful. So a lot of companies include things like family or wellness in their stipends. And a lot of times they include charitable giving. And we saw this huge shift from employees using funds for themselves over to charitable giving, especially in the first 2 quarters of COVID, where it was like a 3,000% shift. It was a huge shift where employees are like, look, I'm good, but I want to take care of the people around me. And so a lot of donations to a lot of different causes, even things like buying gift cards to restaurants that weren't open to try and support their local community. It's not a traditional charity, but because it's taxable income, there's ways that companies can manage this and stay in tax compliance. We saw people trying to support their local communities, and that was just so impactful and so powerful. And it wasn't something that the company didn't have to run an initiative and say, okay, and now we're going to do this thing. They just let the employees do what mattered to them. And that was just really, really incredible to see.
Oh, that's a great message, and sort of gives me some hope for humanity.
Yep. It was pretty cool. We took a look at it and it was like, wow, that's a massive spike. And it's not that companies were offering more money. It was just employees being like, okay, I'm stable, I'm set, I can work from my house, but there's a lot of people who can't. How do I help my local community? And that was just really, it was really cool to see.
Yeah. And so with the Great Resignation, you must be seeing a lot of people coming to trying to figure out really how to stop the trend of people leaving or taking better jobs. So I'm sure that that's something that you guys have addressed and looked at and said, okay, well, if we can keep your employees happy, then they're more likely to stay. So have you seen that trend happening?
It's been interesting. So new prospects, new customers, that's definitely top of mind because they're struggling, especially in industries that maybe didn't have perks before. So industries that were focused on, hey, we've got health insurance and life and disability and that kind of the more traditional set. They're looking at this going, oh my gosh, I got to do something different, but I don't have Google money. How do I do this on a budget? That's where we can really help. We just implemented our signed a contract with a 13,000 person hospital. That's a rural hospital trying to compete with a big local city who is poaching talent because everybody needs nurses right now. And they had to figure out a way to support these people and say, all right, we've got to do something different and something extra because that is what the workforce requires right now. So we're seeing things like that. We're also seeing, though, that it's interesting. I think it's close to 40% of the companies we work with, we've seen the HR leaders move around. There is a lot of movement amongst HR regardless right now as people figure out, I don't know that it's necessarily for a better job. It's people are finding companies that better align with what they personally want. So whether it's mission-based, whether it's the product that they're looking at, maybe it's the team, but there is a big movement that I think some things can be helped by better supporting employees, and some things are just going to happen regardless. And as people reevaluate their lives. And so I think it's going to be a mixed bag for a bit.
Well, I think it's probably a trend that's just going to keep growing, right? If you
Mhm.
look at the what you just described there is very much a millennial
Right,
attitude towards work, and what there are already 75% of the workforce, right,
right,
or will be very shortly.
right,
So so that those are that's just going to be common of things
right.
that we're going to have to do, and what a horrible concept, right? Working for a company that you believe in with a good mission and values, right?
I know, right? Well, I mean, I've certainly talked to some companies that are, stake in the ground. No, we are 100% going to be in person. Everyone's required to be here. I'm like, that is bold. Let me know
Hmm.
how you may find those people who 100% want to be in the office. There are going to be people who want to do that, who don't want to work from home. I think that is going to be very few and far between, because we've proven for over 18 months now that a lot of work can get done in a far more convenient way for people's lives. You don't have to commute an hour each way each day. That is a big waste of your life. And so I think the purpose of the office is going to change. It's not going to be where you go to work. I think that it'll be much more of a collaborative type of an environment, and therefore needs to be less frequent. But I think there's going to be a big shift, and there will be companies who say, nope, 100% in person, beyond like the ones where you obviously have to be in person to
Right.
deliver the services. There are going to be people who want that, but there's going to be a big shaking out as they have to go and find those people now. And they all obviously have to be local. The rest of us, big portion of my team is remote now, because I
Yeah.
can hire people from anywhere. And that's fantastic. I get amazing talent and new perspectives on the team because people don't have to be going into an office.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And that's there's always a market for everything, right?
Yep,
And so there will be a
exactly.
market for people that go, I want to get out of the house. And trust me, having a 4-year-old, there's many times where I thought that I would need to get out of the house too. But um, so I could totally see that, and it will change, right? That
Hmm.
there will be an evolution of folks that want to work from home, that work for those companies,
Right.
go over here and there in the mass senses, right?
Right.
So
Well, and I think we're going to be defining what hybrid really means. So, like, we went all the way to remote over the course of like a week in March
mhm,
last year, and
mhm,
now we're swinging we're swinging back and forth, because we were all in office and then it went to remote. And now we're going to have to figure out what hybrid looks like, and I think that'll be different for different companies and different teams. But I think it's going to take some time to figure out how to be really productive and do that. And I know it's been thrown on HR's plate, but that's not entirely fair for them to design the entire new way that we're going to be productive as a group.
right.
And so I think it's going to take a couple of years at least to figure out what this new, I hate saying new normal, but this new way of working looks like.
Yeah. So the way I see your product, here it, and you're going to elaborate on this, but um, so we always have risk and liabilities, right?
Mhm.
So the compliance, the tracking, the making sure that the people are taxable incomes not is a huge, is a huge bonus, right?
Mhm.
Because um, that can be unexpected,
Right,
costly, just an area that we want to avoid at all costs. So
right.
that's lovely, right? But I imagine you probably don't have any good. Well, you could probably tell me, I'll cite a legal case of XYZ company versus whatever that got, done, fines by the IRS or
Sure.
something that, those exist. And I
Yep.
imagine that they're pretty hefty.
I mean,
Um,
there's a big one right now. Trump CFO. That's
yeah,
exactly what he's in trouble for right now. I mean, among other things, right? So I don't, leaving the politics out of it. At its core, he didn't tax perks correctly, and that's what they've technically indicted him for.
right.
So I mean, that's a big current case that's happening right now, where companies didn't do that. And there's certainly other, it's not court cases, it's not to the criminal level where it was intentional, but other examples of tech companies who had to change their programs because the IRS came in and looked at, I mean, they're all these companies are audited. And so you've got to tax these things correctly. In the same way, we had to go through the huge, painful kind of employment law shift where a lot of tech companies had everybody as contractor, and then we got very slapped by, the Department of Labor, and now everybody's classifying people correctly. Same thing is happening on employee perks because they're so prevalent. They're such a huge portion of our compensation at this point in time.
So, okay, so that's a win, right? That's a
Right.
COA, I think my old boss used to say, right? Or
Yep,
CY,
exactly.
right?
Yep. It
Cover
depends
your
on
rear
what is
end.
it, CMA, depends on who's in charge.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it's always nice to make sure that's covered, but just from your process of what you do, because really it's a it's a tool or software that eliminates um, effort on half of an organization,
I would
right?
say the entire organization,
Right,
actually,
right. So,
because employees now, if you have a bunch of perks, which a lot of large companies have to go find the wiki page where company lists out all these perks, and then they have to go and sign up for each of these things if they decide to, if they remember to. It gets a huge pain, and a lot of those perks go unutilized because of that, because it's like, am I really going to go sign up for 20% off of my Avis rental car? And am I going to remember that before I rent my Avis rental car? Or am I just going to rent the car and be like, I can't be bothered? Like, that is a wasted perk. So you've got the employee side where they need personalization and they need it to happen at the moment that they want it and not have to go looking for stuff. And then on the administrative side, you have to clean up the tax. You need to make sure that this is something that can happen quickly, does not take a huge review process, does not involve, hiring a team to manage your employee perks. Like, the software is meant to be doing the job of multiple people across the organization so that you don't have to hire those people for these kind of more menial, tracking tasks that you shouldn't have to do. And on top of it, you have labor law issues as well. So there's the tax piece, but there's also, say you give stipends to your organization, say, all right, we're just going to put it through, do an expense report. Well, you're obviously going to have to track and make sure people don't go over budget and the tax piece and all that's a mess. But what if one manager approves for one group of people, sky's the limit, use it for whatever you want. And then another manager restricts their team and maybe their team looks a little bit different and that group doesn't get to use it quite as broadly. You're setting yourself up for discrimination within the organization. And a way that you're not intending to. Nobody's intending to discriminate. Something like our software makes global rules across various groups, so you can define the group. So you actually stay out of discrimination territory as well and take that human error portion out, which is one of those unintended, nasty little consequences of just having human beings instead of software.
yeah. And so in a period of 6 months, a year, your ROI in time and effort just has to be right on the table. Like that's a undeniable.
Right.
Yeah.
It's huge. The other piece is looking at the team utilization of their perks. The entire purpose of having employee perks in this day and age is not to just have something flashy that nobody uses. That doesn't retain your people. It doesn't attract people. So you have to have people using it. If you look at any individual perk you bring in, if you're lucky, 10% of the team uses it for things that are very, very specific. It could be 1 to 2% of the team. So think things that are amazing perks like fertility benefits, just not that much of a team is going to use them. The other side of it is, using these marketplaces, you might get 25 or 30% utilization off of a marketplace. You still don't have any of the tax tracking and all of that stuff. With our platform, you get 90+% utilization. So you just have off the charts utilization where almost your entire team is getting something that matters to them. And if they're comparing, okay, I could work at this organization where I get to completely control and decide what happens with my compensation for me versus going to another organization where they maybe have a perk, it's a no-brainer. Like, employees are going to opt for where they get the choice and the control, even within a sandbox that may be one category.
Yeah. And by having your preference, you can build that loyalty
Exactly.
and to the people that you do it with, as well as the acknowledgement from the company. And I'm going to give you like a crazy, simple, stupid example of something that I used to find very loyal. I have a regular gas station that I use,
Mhm.
or that I use now, because it had a points program, right? I insert my card and get my points, and they used to have with your perks you could buy a 6-pack of water bottles, right? And so my girls were heavily into sports, so we do the basketball, soccer, minivans, and inevitably somebody would say, "Oh, I'm dying of thirst," right? And I could go into this gas station, I get a 6-pack of water, right, on my points, and it was amazing how that influenced me to continue to use that gas station,
Right,
because it was just so handy rather than spending $2 a bottle,
right.
right, times however many kids we happen to have in the van that day. I could just knock it off of my points, and
Yep,
and and it changed my habits, right? It made me
yep,
feel good about that. So the opportunities there with your company, and to do that too, which is anytime you can get a favorable thought going towards a place of work based off of
right,
something you purchase is not always there. It's a disconnect in most cases.
right.
So that's cool. So then your ROIs, have you done any case studies or anything? Like, what are they typically ranging at percentage wise?
So we do have a bunch of case studies. It varies by company because you can't tie it realistically. Like I'm a pragmatic person. You can't tie this directly to what your employee turnover is or isn't. There's a lot of factors that go into why an employee may stay or leave. What we do look at is time saved, and it depends on the organization size. Obviously, like if it's a one-person shop, we're seeing single HR leaders save. They typically need to spend 10 to 15 minutes a month on employee perks rather than spending 5 or 6 days on this leading up to payroll. So
Mhm.
pretty good ROI there. In large organizations, that grows because team's bigger, it just kind of multiplies out. And there can be a lot of savings if you're doing this on expense reports. We're half the cost of Expensify, we're a quarter of the cost of Concur, and we're designed to be compensation, which they're not. So they're not even trying to do this. This is just that's the workaround that companies are like, all right, we want to run a stipend. We don't know how else to do it. So there's some very direct ROI costs of just using the correct software for the correct purpose. So you still use Expensify and Concur just for the purpose they were intended for, and then having something actually for compensation. So there's a lot of different ways of calculating ROI: employee utilization, time saved, software costs, all of the above. And so it just depends on the organization, which one is what matters most to them.
Yeah, and there's going to be a few people that listen to this, other vendors in the HR space that are going to be a little jealous of this when you
Right.
answer this question. But how long, um, I won't say typical, but you have conversations often with people and they are up and running in what time frame?
What we found is there's a pretty consistent pattern with HR leaders. If they're ready to go, if they know this is a problem, I need to solve it, from first conversation to implementation is usually about a month. It's a very fast cycle, and that doesn't vary by company size, or not much. So the 13,000 person hospital, first conversation through security review, contract review, which of course is pretty hefty with a hospital that big, 6 weeks. Like really, really, really fast. Now, if they're not in a buying process, it could be years. And so it's
Mhm.
understanding where somebody is in that process and giving them the right information at the right time. HR may love our platform, but if this is not the top of their management team's list of things that are on fire, they may need more time, and they don't need us asking them every 4 to 7 days in CRM software, hey, do you want to meet again? Hey, do you want to meet again? We operate a little differently. So we typically find when somebody's ready to go, they're going to come back, and they're going to come back and they're going to buy, and it's going to be very quick. Implementation doesn't take a long time. Obviously, 13,000 person hospital is very different from a 75 person company. For the smaller companies, it's usually a couple of 30 to 45-minute conversations, usually 2 over the course of a week, and then you're done. So it's a very fast implementation.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I preface that by saying that some of these people would be jealous because, if you're doing an SAP install, you could be looking at like 3 years,
right,
before you pull the trigger and actually get some action on something. So,
well, and you've got, I mean, obviously it's a much bigger price tag, but it's also a much heftier implementation as well, because it's an end-to-end system versus being something that is solving a big pain point, but works with those payroll systems. So it's a very different, it cleans up all the little pieces of software you could be using or all the little vendors you could be using to manage employee perks. So it simplifies that. But I've had to do lots of HR platform integrations. And that was rule number 1 when the engineering team was building this. I was like, make it fast and simple and make sure IT doesn't have to be involved because HR doesn't get attention from IT, and make sure HR doesn't have to do much of anything. It's because there's just no time. Like HR does not have time to do another implementation. I will do everything in my power to not have to do an implementation for more software internally. That's where consultants are for now, because it's painful. And so having that experience influenced the way we built the platform to make it easier for the HR team.
and so if I'm an HR person, how do I do a self check to see if if Compt or a stipend program would be a good fit for me?
So it's thinking about a few different things. One, are you happy with your employee retention? Are you happy with, the number of open recs you have? Are you able to hire people as quickly as you want? If both of those are yes, you don't need us. You're doing a phenomenal job with whatever you're doing internally. If one or both of those are a challenge, stipends may be a good fit. And that's where, we could come in and help. The other thing is to think about the culture in your organization. If your organization wants to say, employee, Joe, you have $20 that you can spend on Netflix, you have $15 you can spend on lunch, and they want to define it very specifically and have that level of control, stipends are not a good fit. If you're an organization that says, look, what we care about is making sure people are happy, making sure that they're retained, making sure that we can let them do really cool things, but focus them, stipends are a great place for that. You can say, hey, we support health and wellness, but not define what health and wellness means. We saw that work really well through COVID, where lots of companies had gym reimbursements, but no one could go to a gym. That's right. A useless perk. Instead, open that up. And now people can use apps, they can get running shoes, they can do mental health, things for their mental health. Expanding that and letting employees drive it makes it much easier and much less stress on the entire organization. So companies who think that way and are very progressive, those are the ones that we're seeing have a fantastic ability to recruit right now, because they're just meeting the needs of employees where they are. So organizations like that are usually a very good fit for stipends. We don't find that they need to find net new spend. So that's usually a question as well. Our software is, a fraction of the cost of what you actually need to spend on your employees as part of the stipends. Most companies we find already have some sort of a stipend in place, and they may not even realize it. So things like cell phone or internet reimbursement. Those are two that a lot of companies are doing. In some states, you have to offer that. But what companies can do is take that money that they're spending on cell phone and internet and say, hey, employees, yep, we still have those two categories, but now you could also use it for some of these other categories. So employees 1 month may submit their cell phone, another month for a nanny, another month for running shoes. It allows the employee journey to move as it needs to move, without HR having to do any additional work. So we find that there's a lot of hidden budget in companies without having to say, okay, now you got to find something new.
And of course, if you have a couple people that work in the dark, office that don't see the light of day as they go through expense reports and all sorts of emails to try to figure out how to reimburse people, then you'd be a good candidate.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we are, best friends with finance teams, because essentially our software says finance, once you've set the budget, you don't have to do anything. And that gets them very happy. They'll probe and test and talk to me on the tax side. And as soon as they get comfortable with that, they're like, so I don't have to do anything else. I'm like, nope, you're done. And they get
Mhm.
very, very happy because it just removed mountains of expense reports off their desk, mountains of tracking. This is all done through payroll, which is already being categorized. It just really simplifies the entire process to something that makes a lot more sense for compensation.
Yeah, totally. And you had mentioned a couple of examples from small companies to 13,000. So where do you really, who do you service, or who, is there a demographic by company size that makes sense to use you guys, or?
It's really not. We've got companies that run the gamut for industries. So everything from healthcare to technology to marketing agencies to construction companies to railroad maintenance. It's anybody who is trying to figure out, how am I going to retain the people I have? And I cannot afford to lose, 40% of my team and be tasked with growing my team at the same time. So I'm supposed to find 50 to 60% new people this year. Not possible. So
Right.
anybody in that camp, regardless of size or industry, ends up finding that stipends are a pretty good fit. A lot of times companies that are really interested in this concept have employees that are very distributed. So everybody isn't in one location. A lot of times, even smaller companies have employees in other countries. There isn't another platform that allows you to have stipends for each country. So you can have different currencies, different time zones, different payroll reporting for each country, all that compliance baked in. So you can have a one team feel, but still have that localization that you absolutely need if you're managing multiple countries. So a lot of times our customers have, people in one or more other countries as well. And so that's a big piece of it too. But yeah, we work with all sizes. We find that the companies that are hitting that inflection point, the 150 to 300, those are the ones that are feeling a really big pinch right now because they were small enough, they were trying to manage it in-house, they've gotten big enough that they're like, oh gosh, like not functional, and I can't add 2 people to my head count right now to just manage this stuff. And then those companies end up growing to be 500, 600, 700 people within a couple of years is pretty much the pattern we've seen.
Gotcha. And is there anything else you think that we should know, or?
I think the thing to keep top of mind, like I think stipends are a great way to support, obviously, and build really inclusive benefits for teams. It's a tool for HR to actually meet that inclusivity goal. There's a lot of talk about that, a lot of talk about building diverse teams, but there's not a lot of tools that make that possible to support a diverse workforce. This is something where you can do that in a way that is very organic. And so for companies that really do want to build a much more diverse or inclusive environment, this is a way to do that without having to say, all right, now we're going to try and find, benefits that this group likes versus that group. I mean, instead of being exclusive, it's inclusive. And I think that's really important in today's environment.
No, that's super cool. Yeah. And how long has Compt actually been around for then?
We're getting close to 4 years in January. So we've been around a bit. We've had customers on the platform since the end of January of 2018. And that first customer is actually still with us, which is pretty cool. But we've got, customers in all 50 states and in 34 countries at this point. So a lot of reach, a lot of learnings that have all fed into how we've built the platform.
Yeah, and I noticed on your site you have some great case studies and some good articles. So, and of course, all the links and contact information will be available somewhere on this after watching this video. But this is great. I mean, I think that's it's a super, I hate to say it, right? It just seems like a super simple solution to a problem that without your background in finance and you probably wouldn't have really seen the need for it, right? And so in a lot of cases you're no different than anybody else, just coming into the HR space from a technology standpoint. You saw a need, or you thought you could build a better mousetrap, and based off your success, you've clearly done it. So congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. So that's great.
Do you want me to stop recording?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's great. I hope